Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Delhi Comparatists, I extend a very warm welcome to our esteemed speaker and all the people who have taken out time to come and attend this event with us today. Today is a very special day for Delhi Comparatists. And as the evening unfolds, we will share certain important information also regarding it. I don't want to give the spoilers now. So we are good to start now. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our group called Delhi Comparatists. Delhi Comparatists is an academic group of students and faculty members of the Department of Modern Indian Languages and Literary Studies at University of Delhi, who are driven by a common interest, that is an active engagement with the discipline of comparative studies. We started in 2010, and through a decade-long journey, Delhi Comparatists has become a large group of scholars sharing its vision and with respect to literature and cultural studies. The group attempts to approach Indian literary culture through a prism of pluralistic epistemology. The thrust areas are history and concepts of comparative Indian literature, theory, multiple clusters of interrelatedness, literary historiography, gender studies, transmediality, migration and border studies, and electronic literature. So methodologically speaking, perspectives on marginocentrism and social epistemology, on material aspects of literary studies and dense archives are the characteristics of this group, Delhi Comparatists. We emphatically endeavor to create a sustainable and socially relevant hub that engages with and enhances the tools, methodologies, theory, and approaches which are analogous to these pluralistic and dynamically interactive areas of study. So it's a great pleasure to have you all today with us. And with this brief introduction to our academic group, I would like to hand over this virtual stage to Professor Amitav Chakravarti. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Charu. So welcome to the first Professor Avadhesh Kumar Singh Memorial Lecture, which is being organized by Delhi Comparatists. Almost all comparatists know that Professor Avadhesh Kumar Singh, our friend and guide Avadhesh, has been very active both in scholarly works and also in administrative policy-making tasks. He was the chairperson of the Knowledge Commission in Gujarat. He served as Vice Chancellor of Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University, and he was serving as the Vice Chancellor of Oro University. As Vice Chancellors in these two universities, and also as the chairperson of the School of Translation Studies in IGNOU, we have seen him working for a pan-Indian understanding of translation, a parallel knowledge system. Born in 1960, his academic works cover a very varied spectrum. He has delivered more than hundreds of lectures, keynote and plenary lectures. He has published more than hundreds of papers. I must say that when we take academics as our career, it's only natural then that in decades of journey, we'll be publishing. So here, the quantity is not which I'm trying to underline. I'm trying to underline the fact that apart from his scholarly contribution, he also contributed in organizational building, contributed in thinking in a new way. He wrote primarily in English, but in Hindi, His introduction to Sanskrit criticism in Hindi is a very renowned book. His work on an alternative to how to do comparative literature in India is a very important work to study. And particularly keeping in mind who our speaker is today, his journey to understand the knowledge tradition of India is very important. If Ganesh Devi, Professor Ganesh Devi has written After Amnesia, which has become a milestone in how we understand the continuity or discontinuity of Sanskritic scholarship vis-a-vis Bhasha scholarship. Avadhesh Kumar's article on titled Neither Amnesia nor Aphasia, which is a counter collaboration with Professor Devi's position, has brought in a very important point, which says that even in Bhashas, there was a continuation. And even when Bhasha flourished, Sanskrit poetics had its own, just not repetitions, had innovations. I think those who try to understand the knowledge tradition and colonization, the effects of colonization, and the composition of literary intellectuals today, for them, this debate, which I see as a look at is as a debate between two great minds of contemporary Indian scholarship, is a very important contribution. And I'm sure will, for quite some time, inspire younger scholars to bring in new thoughts in. I must say that, I mean, however I might sound to be impersonal, when it comes to Professor Avadhesh Kumar Singh, I cannot be impersonal, as most of the Delhi Comparatives members cannot be. He was a personal friend as well. If I have seen, nowadays, I mean, when teachers become vice chancellors, they often lose that thing that comes with teacher-student relationship. I fondly remember that even when he was a vice chancellor, he would come to take vivas, and he will make sure that he talks to everyone and talks not in a patronizing way. I had long conversations with him. We were planning to launch a series of conferences, the Indian Congress on Aesthetics. And he had much more ideas even when he was the vice chancellor. His sudden demise has been a personal loss to us. Loss of an inspiring figure, and also a loss to those who are trying to create new history of knowledge in the subcontinent. I am really glad that we as Delhi Comparatists could think of this memorial lecture. Of course, he was a renowned, important man. Saurashtra University has already started a memorial lecture series named after him. But when at Delhi Comparatists, we bring in young minds from all over India and try to develop a culture of interaction and experimentation, I think Avadhesh Kumar will remain an inspiration for us academically and personally as well. I thank again all of you for joining us. Now I'll request Satyanath, Professor T.S. Satyanath, to take over and introduce today's speaker and chairperson, Satyanath.
Thank you, Amitabh. Um, I don't know whether the memorial lecture is an occasion of celebration or an occasion of feeling sad. It's both, particularly at a time when we lose a young, active scholar in a relatively young age. He was very much younger to many of us. The feelings are mixed. So I don't want to be very formal in inviting both Professor Devi, Professor Shubha Das Gupta, and many of our friends who are here, the advisory board members, Professor Baral, Professor E.V. Ramakrishnan, and many of you. This is the memorial lecture. Hence, let me take this introduction through memories, interviewing Professor Avdesh, Professor Devi, and Professor Shubha Das Gupta. I won't use Professor here afterwards. Devi is one of the most important thinkers of our time. Educated at Shivaji University and University of Leeds, he taught at MS University Baroda till 1996. His subsequent career is with denotified and nomadic tribes at Bhasha Sansthan, Devgarh. Another milestone in Devi's achievement is the project People's Linguistic Society of India, carried out with nearly 3,000 volunteers and published in 50 multilingual volumes. Presently, he is at Dharwad and spearheading the movement Dakshinami. He has about 18 publications in English, Gujarati and Marathi, and engaged in a project on pre-colonial knowledge system, a continuation to what Avdesh imagined. He is a recipient of Sahitya Akademi Award 1993, Sark Writers Foundation Award 2001, Prince Claus Award 2003, Limbo Fox Prize 2011, and Padma Shri 2014. Professor Shubha Das Gupta is from Jadavpur University and is one of the most prominent comparatists in the country. She has several books to her credits and was the editor of Jadavpur Journal of Comparative Literature for nearly 10 years. She is also an editor of the Delhi Journal of Comparative Studies that is going to be launched today. I first met Professor Devi for the first time in 1982 in the SELA conference, which is the early. The first time I met Professor Devi was in 1882 in the Comparative Indian Literature Conference here at Delhi. He had come with a young group of students, a novel academic exercise for me, and I have followed it throughout my career. Then there wasn't much connectivity between us till 2005. Similarly, I met Shubha in 1992 at Jadavpur University in an orientation course, and again in 2004 in Rajkot. Instrumental person was Avdesh for a SAP seminar. Shubha and I were there, and that contact is on even to today. Between 2009 and 11 in Gandhinagar, and between 2011 and 17, IGNOU, Avdesh, Devi, Shubha, and I had several opportunities to meet. They were not just meetings, they created opportunities for intense discussion that resulted in projects. In 2005, I met Devi again. This is in connection with Asian translation traditions, Tejgad. Devi and Rita Kotari had organized EVR and I were there. And of course, subsequently, I and EVR have gone to almost all the conferences of Asian translation tradition till 2017. Shubha had an opportunity to be in Delhi between 2007 and 2008 at JNU and 2012 and 15 at Delhi University. Avdesh at IGNOU between 2011 and 17. This was a golden age for us. Avdesh planned several seminars and events, and Devi and we were a part of it. I should mention 4 phenomenal projects associated with Devi and Avdesh. In some of them, Avdesh may not be there. 2008, in the launch of IGNCA, hundreds of performing groups from all over India were performing on the IGNCA, Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts launch. This became a model for IGNCA. And they subsequently held Ramayana and Mahabharata festivals, for which our students went as audience, and some of them also asked to take part in that. And they became group leaders to help these performing groups, which eventually led to their MPhil studies and dissertation. Hence, this Chotro became an annual feature, and there onwards I went regularly to most of these events. People's Linguistic Survey of India is another of Devi's huge survey project involving, I told you, 3,000 people. Anthropological Survey of India, the government agency, had already done a mega survey of peoples in 1980s. But TLSI is a people's event, about 50 volumes and multilingual in nature, with a lot of translation activity, including the sign language. There was a translation advisory committee in which Avdesh and I were part of the committee. In Chotro 2012, the first set of volumes were released. Translation of these volumes is another co-project of TLSI, which is still on. In 2015, Avdesh conceived a study week on historiography of translation in India at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. Shubha and I were there, many other people were there. When we were celebrating the success of this study week, Devi's special lecture on translation, memory, and artificial intelligence gave us a lot of new insights to think about it. Around 215, Avdesh took another ambitious translation project of a multi-volume publication of critical discourses in Indian languages. Once again, Shubha, Devi, I, and many others were part of the project. The first 3 volumes on Bangla, Telugu, and Odia are going to be released in the coming November. I said all these things to show the nature of connections and networks of shaping intellectual scholarship and Indian literary culture, in which Avdesh, Devi, and Shubha were an integral part of such a phenomenon. People's language and culture, marginality, translation, and rethinking theoretical and methodological issues were central to all of them. After all, celebrating one is also celebrating other people. At the same time, after all, celebration itself is collective. Let me conclude with these words, and now I request Professor Shubha Dasgupta to take over and conduct the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Satyanath. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
ma'am.
You're
Yes,
audible,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yeah.
You're audible.
Thank you, Professor Satyanath. Professor Devi is here. I formally invite him to speak, but before that, a few words. Yes, I'm deeply honored to be a part of this event. The first Professor Avdesh Kumar Singh Memorial Lecture, and of course also to share the dais with Professor Ganesh Devi, not as chairperson, but not really, not ever as, I mean, not as chairperson, definitely, but just somebody who is sharing the dais with him. Professor Devi has been a source of inspiration to many of us and also to our students, and I think now also to their students. And with his path-breaking work with his path-breaking colossal work on the largest ever survey of languages in history of people's languages. The word people is always important for him and is at the heart of everything that he does. He has been an inspiration also for his seminal way of understanding and engaging with the people of India through languages, and particularly the denotified and the nomadic groups. Whenever when a language dies, something irreplaceable dies. This is a quote from Professor Ganesh Devi, and I think all of us have this inscribed in our hearts. This is also a sad occasion for us. A sad occasion because Avadeshji left us on this day, and all of a sudden. But in keeping with the indomitable spirit of Avadeshji and with Professor Devi's words, I know that this occasion will also be molded into an inspiration for action. Whenever these two great workers came together, there was motivation for action. So over to you, Professor Devi. We are eager to listen to your words of inspiration.
Shubhaji, Dr. Kiran Singh, Satyanath, and friends whom I cannot see because of the medium that we have for this occasion. Friends whom I cannot see face to face. Speaking to you about a friend whom I can no longer see face to face. Until it is very difficult for me to not be sentimental being asked to give a memorial lecture for a friend whom I have known for 30 years in the 90s and the first 2 decades of this century. When Avadeshji was at Rajkot, I used to go to his university very frequently for intellectually enterprising seminars because he provided space for controversial statements, adventurous intellectual positions, and free play with logic. I was mightily proud when I learned that he was made Vice Chancellor of a university in Gujarat. And later when he moved to IGNOU, and when I thought of the People's Linguistic Survey in its Hindi version, because having it in English alone would have been a treachery for the people whose languages were being brought together in the PLSI. So when I thought of having a Hindi version of it, I approached Avadeshji, and he made it possible to bring about 30 volumes of this impossibly unwieldy being called the People's Linguistic Survey. He was so resourceful and full of energy and ideas that I often felt I was much older than I actually was, because he was always much younger than he actually was. Very recently, one of the volumes of the Linguistic Survey came out, and that was on Sanskrit, dedicated to the study of Sanskrit language. that was edited by Dr. Singh. Every book from the survey that came gave me pleasure. But when a copy of the Sanskrit volume came, my heart was filled with emotions I cannot describe in words. Here was a man whose scholarship in Hindi, in Sanskrit, in English, in culture, in ideas, in form, in schools of logic, in ethics, aesthetics, fiction, as well as poetry, was so remarkable that one can hardly find a parallel. There are bilingual scholars, there are trilingual scholars, there are multidisciplinary scholars, but Avdesh was very unique. He always looked very calm, and yet he contained in his heart, he could hold in his heart lot many storms. I'm very happy that Dr. Kiran Singh has decided to continue a very impressive series, very ambitious series of books, which is literary criticism, the critical discourse in Indian languages, which Routledge is bringing out. That series that was conceptualized by Avdesh. And I hope that series will continue to keep Avdesh closer to us than possibly we could have imagined. I had warned Professor Satyanath that this lecture is I accepted the invitation for the lecture as a statement of my respect and affection for a younger friend I and all of us lost, and not so much for presenting a new position or earth-shaking new thesis in the field of comparative literature. So I'd warned Professor Satyanath that I might speak less logically than I normally do. Normally I speak, normally I'm not so logical, but today I'm going to be even excessively illogical in what I'm going to say to you. What I want to say to you, young friends, particularly the group in Delhi, young comparatives, Delhi comparative group, is this. If you ever went to the place where Avdesh began his university career, that is Rajkot, you will find people telling you that the language spoken there is Sorti or Saurashtri. Close to that area, some might say they speak the Kutchi language. And it's easy for us to imagine that in Kutch they speak Kutchi, or in the Konkan area of Karnataka they speak Tulu, or in eastern part of UP they speak Bhojpuri, or in northern Maharashtra, northwestern Maharashtra they speak Ahirani. And we all know that these are larger minority languages. But if you were to ask some Kutchi speakers to name their language, some of them might say it's Kutchi, but some others might say it is Jatki. And yet some others still might say it is Muthuaki. Now Muthuaki and Jatki as the subsets of Kutchi is an easy way of entering the problem that I am trying to place before you. Both Mutwaki and Jatki sound very much like Kutchi. But if you were to place Sindhi next to Kutchi and then have a second look at Mutwaki and Jatki, you'll find that Jatki is a little closer to Sindhi, not so much close to Kutchi, and Mutwaki is closer to Kutchi, not so much closer to Sindhi. And one's confidence in describing these two languages gets a bit challenged. Now, if you did not have Mutwaki and Sindhi, Mutwaki and Jatki to help you, and if you had put just Kutchi and Sindhi together, they would they would appear almost like of one piece, a continuum, a single spectrum, though with different colors at the edges. What I'm trying to say is that when we have a number of languages placed together in the context of India, our assumptions about the genesis of those languages, about the etymologies of words in those languages, about the structural peculiarities of those languages, that confidence about those languages, which is assumptions based on certain given theory of language or theories of language, all that confidence, all those assumptions get challenged as we go on adding to the patchwork or the quilt of Indian languages one after the other. I was in Himachal Pradesh about 15 years back, working on a cultural center for the Himalayan states. And I was very curious to know as to what languages they speak there. And they said, some of them said they speak Kangri, others said they speak Kinnori. Kinnori is the place which you, read about in the newspapers today, where there was a very tragic accident with the landslide there, and a bridge had collapsed a week back because the Himalayas are falling. Some might say Kinnori, some might say Kangri, some might say something else. And no one in Himachal Pradesh told me that they speak the Pahadi language. But if I were to look up the wonderfully well-made work called the Linguistic Survey of India, Grierson's Linguistic Survey, I get there a large section on Pahadi, Western Pahadi, Central Pahadi, and so on. The names change, the identity changes. And if you were to look at the official documents of the Himachal Pradesh government, you might actually come back with the impression that Pahari is the language spoken all over Himachal Pradesh. There may be some doubt about my observation, and therefore I'll take one more example, and that is from Rajasthan. We all know that the Sahitya Academy has been giving literary awards for works in Indian languages, and every year, or at least once in a while, an award is given to the Rajasthani. I have tried my best to find out in Rajasthan who speaks Rajasthani. To my queries, I got 44 different answers. And some have said they speak Mewati, others have they said they speak Marwari, Yet others have said they speak some variety of Bhili. Some of them have said they speak language which is predominantly spoken in Haryana, Haryanvi, or the the Western UP, languages of the Western UP. But no one spoke Rajasthani. Now the question is, does the Rajasthani exist? I will not say the Rajasthani does not exist or Pahari does not exist, but I'll say that Rajasthani and Pahari exist within a certain framework of identity acceptance, or the wonderful term that was used at the beginning of this evening by Charu, and that is pluralistic epistemology. Several identities are acceptable for people of this country. And this is not peculiar only to the Himachal Pradesh or Rajasthan or Gujarat. I can go on giving examples from Maharashtra, Karnataka, practically every state. But I think the point I'm making here is that just as an individual has a name, and there's a reasonable certainty about the name, about who one's parents are, there is not enough certainty in India about the language identity. Marathi, which looks like a language, when we go closer to it, is found to be a federation of languages, 18 different languages, which people think are their languages, like Ahirani, which I mentioned earlier. The Ahirani speakers sometimes claim Ahirani as a language, and sometimes they claim it as a variety of Marathi. If these distinctions are not very clear, as students of comparative literature, comparative social studies, how do we approach these 130 or 140 crore people who speak all these languages? I mean, ask a French person what the person speaks, and she will say, or he will say, it's French. Maybe there's a dialectical variety, dialect variety. I mean, why can't the English speak English? Is a question that the Londoner often uses, ask of a Yorkshire fellow. I'm aware of that. But I'm not speaking of dialects. I'm speaking of languages. How many of these languages exist in the country? God alone knows. And the People's Linguistic Surveys reported 780. But that too is a hugely entangled mass of material, and that enumeration also is really very difficult. The Census of India, the last time around, 2011, had mentioned some 1900 mother tongues. So at least 1380 or 70 of those were accepted by the census as mother tongues. I know that a mother tongue is not necessarily a language. A mother tongue is self-identification of the language by an individual. Even if it's not 1300,000, 800, 900, whatever that number is, but it is in hundreds. And of that we can be sure, even today, though India is allowing at least one language to die every 15 days. It's a genocidal, phonocidal society that we have, made ourselves. With 1,000 languages or several hundred languages, and with a reasonably difficult situation of identity, language identity, identification of a language as a language, where does one begin to draw the boundaries of a languageness and therefore lineage of creative material, creative expression in that cosmos, that universe of languageness? That's a question that one should ask a Kannadiga. I've been trying to figure out. All others describing the Kannada language from outside have told us for a while that maybe 1,000 years, maybe 1,500 years, maybe 2,000 years, maybe 3,000 years history. But where does Kannada become Kannada? No specific answer is available. I will take a rather dramatic example to draw this point home. I'll leave Kannada aside for a while. I'll spare the Kannada language because it's the same with the Assamese language. Scholars like Niyogi have spoken about a proto-Assamese, that is a variety of an ancient variety of the Assamese language, predating the arrival of the Sanskrit language in the country. While let's say the official histories of literature in India, such as come from the National Book Trust or Sahitya Academy or other national bodies, don't allow us to look beyond Shankar Dev in Assamese. That is 5 centuries, 6 centuries, 8 centuries. It's the same with Bangla. Practically every major language that we speak today has a great uncertainty surrounding its history. We all know that, historiography is another interest of this Delhi group, and therefore I mentioned this historiographical issue. We all know that when writing history of literature became necessary for university, for producing texts for university courses, our scholars quickly accepted the model of ancient, middle, and modern, as is done with the English language. When I'm not blaming them, I'm not dismissing them. They did very good work in their time. What I'm saying is that even in our time, when we have better library resource available to us, better scholarship, scholarly work, stock of scholarly work available to us, we are still fumbling, exploring, not able to decide where our languages begin. I'll return to this rather radical example that I wanted to choose to strengthen this point. This is example from a district in Maharashtra called Buldhana. Buldhana has 6 or 7 villages, and those villages where the inhabitants speak a language called Nihali. Now, we all know that after Sir William Jones arrived in India and his exposure to Persian and Sanskrit increased, he came up with a thesis about language relations in ancient times, Persian, Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, etc., etc. A Proto-Indo-European was imagined, a Proto-Indo-Aryan, Indo-Iranian, Indo-Aryan. They were all conceptualized. Language families were canonized, and very solemnly, the idea of the language family was accepted. And throughout this, that happened at the end of the 18th century. Throughout the 19th century, linguists all over the world, with a gusto, went about determining the family identity of every language. But some languages were cleverer than the linguists of the 19th century, and they defied the familiarizing of languages. Nihali is one such. It just cannot be placed into any language family. It is therefore described, for the ease of classification, as a language isolate. But even if it is a language isolate, for linguists, for the people who speak it, it is a language, as other languages are languages. Now, how did this strange being called Nihali came into the Buldhana district? To answer that question, I mean, it is unrelated to Dravidic, it is unrelated to Indo-Aryan, not Tibeto-Burman, not Austric, not nothing. It is as if it is airdropped sometime in the past, as if it had no relation any time with all the surrounding other languages. And Nihali is not the only one. There are others, but I'm taking this as an example. When one starts one's quest to know how and when did Nihali arrive here, one notices that there are just very small demographic dots in some villages in the Madhya Pradesh, which is neighboring, geographically not too far. Those very, very small demographic dots in the in the portrait of this country, demographic portrait of this country, which bring an idea to one's mind that some Nihali people were in the Madhya Pradesh and some in northern Maharashtra, bordering the Madhya Pradesh. If we take the help of archaeology, we find that some of these people have a connection with the rock paintings in Madhya Pradesh, which go back to not 500 years or 2000 years, but to a time that is at least 30,000 years before us, stretching to nearly 60,000 years before our time. Some of you might have seen these rock paintings in Madhya Pradesh. They're inside caves, and one just doesn't know how those people climbed up to paint the roofs, which are very tall, almost 35, 40, 50 feet. But humans can do many things, many strange things at many strange times. I'm saying that the layer upon layer upon layer of language in the lineage of a language and in the lineage of the creation of Indian society, there are still any number of unsolved puzzles and mysteries which we all need to tackle in order to grasp where we are, who we are, and what we are doing with what we have created as expression or as exemplary expression, that is literature or theater or music or shadow play or cinema. Who we are and where we are. Recently, genetics has contributed a fat lot, though it is a very dangerous way to go up because it can lead to great racial divide and discord. And yet, in a very considered way, with lot of caution, I would like to mention what the findings of genetics are. And those findings are that humans, the people like us, the modern, what genetics calls the modern humans. And when they speak about modern humans, they are not speaking about the publication of the Westland by T.S. Eliot or Wind Among the Reeds by W.B. Yeats or Samuel Beckett, but they're talking of about 70,000 years, a period of 70,000 years at least, and stretching back to a much longer past of about 2 lakh years. Modern humans like us migrated out of Africa, and in the first wave of migration, they managed to get into Asia and go even up to Australia. Of course, that took nearly 20,000 years time. And some of them went even to the United States, what is now the United States, the North America. But then came a slowdown of that migration and a second wave of migration of people who had moved out of Africa, but had been in what is for us the West, physically the West, not the intellectually, ideologically the West, Western Asia. And that second wave started sometime around 45,000 years ago. The first wave of migration was very slow. The second wave of migration was relatively much rapid. The second wave of migration hit the Indian landmass sometime around 45,000 years before Christ, at the southernmost tip of India, Sri Lanka, and even the Andamans. And it is from there that people moved into this landmass that India is, as we know it as India. The first wave migrants who had settled were far fewer in number, and the second wave migrants had sometimes a crossbreeding and sometimes a clash with them. But the difference between the first wave and the second wave migration was that the second wave migration had brought with it a language possibility called the past tense. Till then, human languages were capable only of articulating things in the present tense. But these had the past tense. And with the past tense, idea of the past tense, conceptualization of time, because as we all know, time does not exist. We have made it. We have imagined it. We have conceptualized it. And in order to grasp that conceptualized time, human brain developed a memory beyond a pure sensory memory, as a cultural memory, as the foundation of knowledge, foundation of arts, foundation of expression, complex expression. It is with the conceptualization of the past, with which the second wave of migration had its language equipped, that the first seeds of what Indian languages are were sown. Now think of the time. Of course, all of the humans did not migrate from the Andaman or South India or Sri Lanka all over India in a single month or a single day or single year or a single decade or a single century. It has taken very long time, and the population was much, much less than we can imagine. And therefore, these were slow journeys. These were clashes spread over several thousand years. Co-breeding, collaborative breeding, creating further generations also was spread over many parts of the country. For instance, they had reached Kashmir, and therefore some of the bones and the teeth found in archaeological excavations, analyzed chemically, tell those stories. Somewhere, the Shivalik Hills, for instance, became another home. Somewhere near Paitan in what is now Maharashtra, somewhere in Konkan, that is the Western Ghats, but not everywhere, not everywhere. And the rivers had not come in the picture in a big way till then. Our normal idea, our average idea is that civilizations emerge along the river banks. That was fine when somebody wrote the history of the Nile River. But that is not exactly how things happened. Now, there was a period in this advent of man in the subcontinent. There was a period of a break, of a slowdown, of a decline, even destruction. And that period was spread over from 19,000 to about 9,500 years before our time. And that juncture in time is called Holocene, where Holocene begins, a warming up of the earth, warming up of atmosphere begins. But prior to that, there was an age when everything was cold. There was a lot of ice. There were ice spread over almost half or more than half of what is India today. Many species died. Humans survived, but not all of them. And therefore, not all of the languages that were in use from 45,000 before Christ to 9,000 years before Christ, not all of them, some survived. I've taken a lot of time in describing this whole situation because all of this situation is our situation. It is our past. And it has impacted everything we think or do or conceptualize or enact in our ideas, in our intellectual production, and in our cultural practices. We have, since 9,500 years before Christ till today, that's the last 10 millennia before Christ till today, last 12,000 years, many languages came up and went down. And Sanskrit was neither the first nor the last of those. Sanskrit too did come up, and it too did go down in history after a very active existence of nearly 1,600 years. But surely after the 8th century AD, Sanskrit did not have active life in this country. And that's how the Desi Bhashas, the Bangla, Marathis, Kashmiri, Oriya, probably Oriya, Punjabi. Why I has described the diversity of languages, nearly 1,000 languages that we have today, and the long history of nearly 12,000 years that we have to encounter, analyze, understand without twisting the truth about history, without becoming too parochially nationalistic. The reason is because many things that happen in our languages are not fully understood by us till today. When we are there, we are within these languages, but our acquaintance with their past, their present, their depth, their rootedness, their agility, their intermixtures, it's all pretty superficial. I wanted to say to you, the researchers, friends, those who want to bring in history, social sciences, linguistics, literary studies, study of imagination and study of images, that India is an absolutely fascinating field for comparatives. But our idea of comparison has to be our idea of comparison. Because what we're going to compare, what we compare, how we live in multiple epistemologies is a phenomenology of our being. So far, we have used one or the other shortcut to arrive at conclusions. Initially, the shortcuts were provided by the givens, by European theory of language, history, and so on. Subsequently, the shortcuts were provided by some parochial sense of pride, such as Marathi is superior to other languages when Maharashtrians speak. Kannada is to other languages and Tamilians. Bangla far superior to Oriya when a Bangla speaker speaks. This is a shortcut because that pride conceals a lot of ignorance of what one's language is. The sentiment shuts the doors of the hall of reason. I do not think Indian scholarship has as yet arrived at any sound understanding of the past of our languages and therefore the present of our languages. And because that has been the case, our literary histories have been at worst confused and at best very boring, while the exciting literary histories. Just three more points I'll make in brief and then I'll stop. One is the migrations. Our literary histories reveal migrations like nobody's business. When there is in Maharashtra a medieval saint poet called Namdev. Now he traveled because he was expelled by the Brahmins. He was tortured by the Brahmins, so he went out of Maharashtra all the way to Punjab. And on his route, he stopped by in Rajasthan and left behind a method of drawing figures, which is called chap. And now in Rajasthan, you have the chap kirtans, chap bhajans, chap songs. Namdev is the source of those. Neither the Maharashtrians nor the Rajasthanis know about this till today. People from Tamil Nadu have migrated all the way to Assam and left literary forms behind. Or people from Uttarakhand, what is Uttarakhand today, have migrated all the way to Andhra Pradesh and have left literary forms behind. And we have not been able to map the literary migrations in the country in the past in a comprehensive manner. And that itself is a project which will require a team of 100 scholars working for 100 years. But that project somebody must take up and complete, because it will add to our knowledge of who we are. Similarly, about the knowledge stock in a language. When, we often grumble about the English language and say that English alone is the language of knowledge and other languages are languishing, they're non-knowledge languages, and we normally hate the English language. But we do not have enough inwardness to how knowledge was made in India's languages. For instance, the Mahabharata, which is there in Sanskrit and translated in Kannada, in Tamil, in Hindi, in Marathi, etc., is not the only Mahabharata, but even the Ahirs, that is the cow herds in southern border of Rajasthan, have a Mahabharata. And these Ahirs, in their Mahabharata, actually depict the situation of India prior to the arrival of the Sanskrit language during the Harappan and Harappan culture. And as we know, the geographical area of that civilization is where the Ahirs of today live. So there's a direct continuity. Now, this earlier Mahabharata, earlier version of the Mahabharata, the direct continuity of maybe 5,000 years before our time, and a new Mahabharata coined by, shaped by Vyasa, fascinating work, about 3,000 years. We still do not place that Mahabharata of the Bhils as being earlier and therefore somewhat better time tested and slightly superior to the Vyasa Mahabharata. We do not have a relative major assessment of knowledge formed in our country. I'm not talking about scientific theories and research. I'm not talking about the 20th century, 21st century at the moment at all. Now, in the times, well, I mentioned the 21st century, and suddenly my mind drags me away from my 70,000 years ago discussion to the contemporary times. We have not been able to assess the complexity of language and therefore complexity of literature and therefore of imaginative creation and so on. We've not been able to do a precise migration mapping of knowledge and creativity. We have not been able to assess the formation of knowledge in the past, except through the the framework of Shat Darshanas and so on. There are many darshanas, not Shat Darshanas, 60 darshanas. Take it from me. If I have enough time in life, I'll prove it one day. But in our time, in the third decade of the 21st century, all of this is facing a threat. Facing a threat from artificial memory and artificial intelligence. And artificial memory does not have memory of itself, because it is made by somebody. It begins with the beginning. But human memory is capable of getting into an area of the origins, understanding of the origin, which is gray, and can remain there comfortably, or what Keats said about William Shakespeare, to the ability to remain amidst uncertainties, the negative capability. The human memory has that negative capability. The artificial memory does not have that, because it is because of its making. We, it is of our time in the third decade of the 21st century have a very big challenge before us, a very, very hugely fascinating area of study before us. And that area is calling us to open up the question of history, question of historical migrations, the question of how philosophies were made philosophies and brought in the position of dominance, and the question of what truly is the creativity of these long-lasting humans in this part of the world. But we also have the challenge before us of not being parochial, not being too excessively nationalistic, not drowning ourselves in self-pride and a blindness that some of us have accepted because we're scared of asking questions. I think if this generation of comparative researchers don't worry whether it's literature, linguistics, or forget the name of the discipline. It is the aim of the discipline that matters. The comparatives of this time, if they take up this challenge and come up with new narratives, new descriptions, new theory, new understanding, new affinities, new nuances and interpretations, people like Professor Avdesh Kumar Singh or G.N. Devi might feel really happy, and they will be grateful to you. Thank you indeed.
Well, saying thank you merely is not enough. We have a chat box where you have, where our chat box is flooded with congratulatory messages, showing that this room, which has more than 200 participants, how deeply engaged they have been with your talk. And this has been an excellent homage to the memory of Professor Avdesh Kumar Singh, because he too was, I remember that the last seminar, not the last seminar really, but a seminar in 2017 that he had organized was also about going beyond the post-colonial. So he was also questioning assumptions, breaking through assumptions, which we were talking about today. We were talking about, but you wanted to talk about, you said that there were no simple equations. There were no linear assumptions, that there were layers and layers of complexities. And that it was very important for anyone engaged with knowledge to know that knowing about what we do not know also constitutes knowledge. And so we have, I think we have, all of us have a great deal to take home from your talk today. We thank you once more. And it will be, it is impossible to sum up, or it is impossible to talk about, about the issues, the various issues, because you raised, a large number of issues, and all of them from a perspective that was rooted in history, that was rooted in the lived experiences of people, and that was from, and that had behind it a grassroots perspective. Thank you very much for this. And I'm sure comparatists, particularly young comparatists today, looking for new directions, and it is important to look for new directions, particularly at this point of time, particularly after the pandemic, during this period of the pandemic, and also because of various historical reasons. One has to re-envision things. One has to have newer visions of and have and of course, try to look at perspectives, try to have newer perspectives, try to have open questions, as you said, open questions related to history, open questions related to philosophy, open questions related to creative endeavors. You talked about fuzzy language identities, which again is very, very important in the context of histories of literatures in India. This is, this has been extremely enriching for all of us, and I'm sure we will have. And as you said, in your abstract, you said that you will share your wonder at the sense of plenty, and that is exactly what you have done. And your sense of wonder has also touched us and our sense of wonder, and that, I think, will lead to young minds looking for new horizons in future. Thank you so much, and I thank all members in this room today, and particularly Kiranji, and also Ranu, if she's here. I'm not sure if she's here. She has been able to come. And also we are, in accordance with the conventions, we are not having question answers, but we'll move on to the next part of this event today. And for that, I invite Professor Amitav Chakraborty. And once more, our gratitude to you, Professor Devi, and our gratitude to all who are here today, our gratitude to the to all who thought of this meeting, and of course all who have been working behind the scenes. Thank you very much, and of course, and there are people from all parts of India today. We are really grateful to all of you, and we know that, and we thank you. So over to you, Professor Amitav Chakraborty.
Shubhati, this is Shubhashree. Sorry to, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, this is Shubhashree, and sorry to just jump in here. I just wanted to express my deepest gratitude to Charu for inviting me, to Professor Devi, and for this wonderful talk, to you for chairing the session. And Professor Avadhesh Singh, I wasn't aware today, but I have met him. He's blessed me. My first publication was because of him. So it's a wonderful moment for me. Thank you so much. And Satyanath for sharing the invitation. Thank you all very much. Sorry to take this 1 minute. I really wanted to express my deepest gratitude as somebody who's taught in the MIL department for many years, comparative Indian literature. So this is just a note of heartfelt gratitude. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Shubhashree. Yes, thank you. Yes, over to Professor Amitav Chakraborty.
Thank you, Shubhadi. We'll move to the next session of our today's plan. Today had been this lecture, and how we have planned it. We would have loved if we could leave organization of such a memorial lecture to our next generations. Unfortunately, we are doing this today. But at the same time, we are talking of a man, an individual, who has gone beyond his ideological position, dealt with the spectrum, which is the beauty of democracy. And as the speaker we have today, someone who has always tried to write people's history. So today, on behalf of Delhi Comparatists, we are also going to inaugurate our journal and website. Now, after a decade-long journey, inaugurating the journal and website must be a moment of happiness. Those who deliver memorial lectures about, or organize about those who were in the past, for them that might be easier. But for those who have been in personal touch with that man, in the name of whom we are organizing a memorial lecture, whose sudden demise was so sudden for us, it's a painful experience as well. But a person lives through his ideas. And hence, I can imagine, pardon me if I call him Avdesh again, Avdesh coming to me, who is much younger to him, both in position and in experience, and just sitting and talking about the plan for that conference on India, aesthetics in India. He was a vice chancellor at that time, and I was an associate professor. So I think this is the day when we need to also show that, yeah, we are trying to do something. So in this section, we are going to inaugurate our website and journal, the first issue of the journal. I'll request one of our students, Dhurjati, I call him Dhruv, but okay, he has an official identity by now. He is teaching in the comparative literature department in Guwahati University. So I'll request Dhruv to introduce the website and the journal for the participants. Dhruv.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for the opportunity. A very good evening to all of you. At the very outset, I fondly remember Professor Avdesh Kumar Singh, sir, as has been reiterated. I mean, he was somebody with whom we were personally connected, and he was somebody who inspired us to take up this subject for further study. And I would also like to thank Professor G.N. Devi for agreeing to deliver this lecture and delivering such a fascinating lecture. Thank you, sir. So now coming to the responsibility that I have been entrusted with, Charu has at the beginning of the lecture had talked about Delhi comparatists and the activities that we have been doing for the last 10 years. So what we have decided is to bring together, to compile the activities and to, to bring all our experiences together in the form of a website, where we shall be constantly updating about our activities, events, and more importantly, about the journal that we are going to launch today. So I'll just quickly take a few minutes to talk about the website and also some of the research activities that have that will find expression, that will find its space within the website. The website that's going to be launched today is delhicomparatist.org, and that website, I'll very soon share the screenshot of that website. Now, the website contains the journal, information on the research forums under which my co-members of this group are undertaking research activities. I'm quickly coming on to that. It will have information on the ongoing projects, news and events, and also links to the lectures that have been organized under Delhi Comparatists. Now, I'm happy to inform you that we have developed different research forums under Delhi Comparatists, and I'll quickly name them. And they are comparative literature in India, comparative manuscriptology, comparative folklore studies, COVID-19 cultural response archiving and research, diaspora and memory studies, digital humanities, intermediality studies, literary historiography, rhetoric studies, and translation studies. And apart from that, there are certain ongoing projects of DC, which are developing an archive on comparative literature in India, under which work has begun on developing an archive on the life and works of Professor R.K. Dasgupta. And other projects include multilingual translation of Qazi Nazrul Islam, reception of Qazi Nazrul Islam in Indian literatures, COVID-19 Cultural Response Archive, and also a book that's coming out in a few months' time, and also a very important component within COVID-19 cultural response, that is COVID-19 Muslim response and research. So these are the research forums under which we are undertaking various activities, and very soon the website will contain updated information on the various activities and events that have been organized and that will be organized in due course of time. Now, coming to the most important aspect of the website is the journal. The journal is called the Delhi Journal of Comparative Studies, in short DJCS. And we are thankful to Professor T.S. Satyanath and Professor Shubha Chakravarti Dasgupta, who have taken over the responsibility to be the editors of this journal. And we also have a very vibrant editorial team. So we are developing the website now. The website will be fully functional in just 2-3 days time. So we'll be sharing the link to the website very soon on social media. So may I request you, everyone, to please visit our website and also get access to the journal. It's an open access journal, and also information on various activities organized by the research groups. So now may I request Professor Amitabh sir to request Professor Devi sir to launch the website. So what I'll do, I'll quickly share the screenshot. I'll share the screen to the website, and Amitabh sir, please do the needful, sir. Over to you, sir.
Yes, please share the website.
Yes, I'm just doing it in a second. Is it visible to everyone?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, sir.
So Professor Devi, I'll request you to, okay, there is no button pressing, there is no other ceremony, but we'll be grateful to you if you say that you have inaugurated this journal on this day, and say a few words.
It's a great privilege for me to be asked to inaugurate the journal. And I'm sure that journal will bring very fascinating studies to scholars because of the eminent scholars directing the journal. I feel very happy that this journal is taking birth in the 21st year of the 21st century, because our engagement with comparative literature in the manner of 2020 is over, and now is the test engagement in the 21-21. So congratulations for, and also if you all recall that it is exactly a century ago that Gurudev Tagore founded the Vishwabharati. That was in December, I believe. We are at least 3 or 4 months ahead of Gurudev. So and Vishwabharati was a foundational idea for comparative literature. And therefore, to bring up this journal, to bring out this journal, and to bring in this journal at this juncture is the most appropriate response to the world that is being radically altered by COVID, dictatorship, artificial intelligence, and a big gap between the poor and the rich. Thank you so much. I wish this journal a long, safe, happy, glorious journey. And I would, for one, like to read the issues with great interest. As they said, that as they said, in Shakespeare, in different tones and voices, that this was a face that launched. I mean, I'm talking of actors on stage, face that launched 1,000 ships. Let this journal launch 1,000 intellectual and academic and activist careers. Thank you indeed, and all very best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Professor Devi. You being there and talking about this is very important for us. I mean, as a student, when I was a student, I read After Amnesia. As a young teacher, I read Neither Amnesia nor Aphasia. And I was really perplexed. As you have mentioned already, the point is not, okay, maybe I don't agree with or don't need to agree with either of you. On the last month, I was telling my teachers, students that, I mean, Professor Devi looked at certain cultures and Professor Avdesh looked at certain different cultures. But both of them, writing in English, claimed India to be their territory. And here starts the fallacy. But at the same time, it's true that Indian scholarship in English needs to talk about these things. We are really grateful that today, on the occasion of the first memorial lecture for Avdesh, and you as a speaker, we are inaugurating this website and the journal. Both of you are inspirations for us. Maybe at my age, inspirations don't matter, but I am sure there are too many young people around us who need inspirations. Thanks a lot. I have listened to Professor Devi's lectures. Of course, as backbencher, as I am always. Today, his lecture was a bit different. And he clearly said that this is going to be a bit different today. And there's the charm, there's the importance of having scholars who are not just scholars, but activists, and I'll say it in Sanskrit, pragyavan, who has wisdom. This is true for Avdesh. I stood exactly at the opposite end of his ideological belief. But yet, I found him as a person who was nurturing me. Came out of his vice chancellorial office and fort, etc. Those who live in Delhi University know about the vice chancellors. He came out of that. And Professor Devi has always came out of the fort that scholars usually make around themselves. Yes, when you were talking, Professor Devi, about language and others, I was being reminded of the Quebec experience. How wonderfully they have claimed their existence based on a variety of French that they speak in a country which is not France. Also, I was reminded of why People's Linguistic Survey matters. Why Professor Devi's journey to understand the amnesia and how to deal with it, and Professor Avdesh's journey to claim that there has been a continuation, should matter to us. Because if you don't have the Purva Paksh and Uttar Paksh, then you don't reach at the finding. I'm so thankful to you, Professor Devi, that you accepted our request. You are a bit different today. I have listened to quite a few of your lectures, and very consciously you are different. And that's where scholarship goes, journeys towards wisdom. Thanks a lot for accepting our request. Thanks a lot for being here. We are trying in Delhi Comparatists to develop various Indian models of historiography, like the Charyapada model, the Vidyapati model, the Manipravalam model. I really wish that we will have you as one of our mentors in this journey. Today, we are thankful to Kiran Singh and Ranu Singh for being with us, to K.C. Boral, EVR as we fondly call him, E.V. Ramakrishnan, Chandra Mohan, Vishnu Mahapatra, Mitra Mukherjee Parikh, Balaji, Shams Hawk, Harish, Arnab, Nandita Di. I have mixed. I have not made it hierarchical very consciously. Arnab should not have come in the list, but I very consciously choose his name. Because this is what we do or are trying to do. Beyond age, beyond position, beyond hierarchy, we are trying to understand ourselves. And in this journey, this event is very important. Thanks to Avdesh and surely Professor Devi. I'll not thank Satyanath or Shubhati because they are part of Delhi Comparatists. I'll not thank others. But I'll end with this point that Professor Devi's lecture today about Avdesh tells us something. Tells us that our positions are negotiable. Our scholarships are to be respected and our insights to be appreciated. Thank you all, particularly Professor Devi. Thanks a lot. I'll end here.
If the recording has stopped, I want to thank all the friends you mentioned and stay safe in this time of COVID. Good night.
Thanks a lot, Professor Devi. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining in.
Okay, so as admin, I have one more responsibility. I'll close the meeting now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Devi. We will really like you have to be a part of our journey because we learned about the journey thanks to you and people like you and Avdesh. So thank you. Thanks a lot. I'm closing the meeting now.